Okay, so important terminology that you need to know. Well, let me say two things. One is, one of the reasons we went through history, and you will hear history for each of the groups, is because you need to know the history to actually work with folks. You need to know what their experience has been, especially what their experience has been with the mental health community, because it will affect how they are when they come to see you. And it will be very important for you to have some sense of what their struggle has been. Also, politically, whenever there's anything happening, and there's a lot happening out there right now, it impacts people in very huge ways. And there's lots of studies to show that there's an increase in anxiety disorders and substance abuse and other kinds of things when there's legal action taking place, like in states where they've banned or had a discussion about banning same-sex marriage. Those kinds of things happen. So that's an important piece. It's also important to know what you're talking about when you hear terms, or if somebody comes into your office and they talk about particular things, that you know what they're talking about. There are certain terms that cross all of the communities, and so I want to talk about those. First of all, there's the LGBTQ, QQI acronym. You'll hear it in a lot of different ways. LGBT is generally what you hear. Sometimes you hear GLBT. That stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. The I is for intersex. The Q is for queer and questioning. A, sometimes you'll hear, is for ally or asexual. So those are all the people that can fall under this huge umbrella of LGBT. And one of the things to know about LGBT folks is it's an extremely diverse community. It's much more, there's much more diversity than there is similarity even between those letters, which is part of the reason we broke it out. So just to be clear, lesbians are women who are attracted romantically, sexually, affectionately to other women. And that includes trans women, so they may identify as lesbian. Gay men are males with the same thing. They're males who are affectionately, romantically, sexually attracted to other men. Often there are issues around identity of using these words, so it's also a self-identity. Bisexual are people who are attracted romantically, sexually, affectionately to people of any gender. And transgender folks are people, and this is a little different. These are people who have a different gender identity presentation or experience of themselves than what is culturally normal. That can be very broad depending upon the culture. But transgender, one of the things that's interesting about that is that it doesn't fit as well with sexual orientation because it's not the same. It's gender identity or gender expression. And one of the things to know is that you can have somebody who's transgender who also is lesbian, gay, or bisexual, or heterosexual. You can also have somebody who's lesbian, gay, or bisexual be transgender. So one is not the other. And we'll talk a little bit more about how those are distinguished a little bit later. So the term transgender is an umbrella term. It's a huge term. It's about as big as LGBT because it includes anybody who moves away from their gender that they were assigned at birth and crosses over the boundaries. Intersex is a genetic or hormonal condition that involves variation in sex chromosomes or hormones. Often these folks can be born with, they used to be called hermaphrodism, but that's not accurate because they can look all different kinds of ways and experience themselves in all different kinds of ways. So the intersex community is very different from the LGBT community, but they often get lumped in for various reasons, which we'll explain later. So it's missing the first one. Some other important terminology is you'll hear the terms MSM or WSW. That is men who have sex with men or women who have sex with women. These are people who do not identify as part of the LGBTQ community, but they started using those terms because they were having, particularly with men who were having sex with men, having trouble capturing them or advertising to them around HIV and safe sex and things like that. And so they had to stop using just the terms gay and bisexual. The term in the closet refers to anybody who is LGBTI who does not cannot, will not disclose their sex, sexuality, sexual orientation, gender identity to their friends, family, coworkers, or society. There are varying degrees of being in the closet. You can be in the closet at work, but not at home. You can be in the closet with everybody. There's also a term called down low, which often is in people of color communities, and a lot in the African American community. And some of those folks consider its own sort of sexual orientation because it includes masculinity along with being, it's usually for gay men, and it's, or men who have sex with men who consider themselves maybe heterosexual, or just down low is another way of referring to how their sexuality works. Often they'll have relationships with women. Cisgender is a term that describes someone who feels comfortable with their gender identity and gender expression and expectations assigned to them based on their physical sex. Basically, what we used to call biologically born folks. So that's most of the community is cisgender. That their gender identity and their bodies match. Coming out refers to the process in which one accepts one's own sexuality, gender identity, or status as either or as an intersex person. There is a sense of coming out to yourself. Some people call this coming in. It also refers to the process when you share your sexuality, gender identity, or intersex status with other people, when you come out to friends, family, coworkers, things like that. So cross-dressers, you'll hear about cross-dressers. They are anybody who dresses in clothes opposite their assigned gender. By the way, assigned gender is what you are assigned at birth. Drag is dressing in gender identified from the opposite of one's sex for the intent of performance or entertainment. So a lot of people know RuPaul, famous drag queen. There's also drag kings. Some people might not know that. It does not denote sexual orientation. It's a play with gender. Gender binary is the idea that there are only two genders, male and female, man or woman, and that person must be strictly gendered as either or. Genderqueer is a gender variant person whose gender identity is neither male nor female. They kind of flow in between genders or have some combination of genders. And often they have a political agenda or to challenge gender stereotypes and the gender binary system. So they kind of push the envelope quite a bit. They also don't have trouble hiding, so they're out there a lot. People can't pinpoint them as one thing or the other. So in some ways they default to having to be out in that way. Gender nonconforming or gender variant is often used with youth. Basically, it's presenting gender traits that are not normally associated with one's biological sex. Gender neutral is the use of non-discriminatory language to describe the community, relationships, etc. There are things like gender neutral pronouns that people use, like ze and here, for folks who fall in the more genderqueer or gender fluid area. And then there's genderism, which is acting in a traditional gender role is considered superior to not acting in that way. So that there are particular roles for men and women, and that's the way it should be. Heterosexism. That is the idea that heterosexuality is superior to alternative sexuality, which is inferior. Heteronormativity, which is something that I've actually written a lot about, is the tendency to view the world through a heterosexual lens. Actually, this is what I find. It views heterosexuality as the norm, and that clearly defined gender roles for men and women are that they're there, and that that's what they're supposed to be respected in that way. It kind of defaults to that, and I think that this is an issue for everybody, whether they're gay, lesbian, straight. That we all get indoctrinated into these ideas, and they influence how we view things. And as therapists, I find a lot of people end up. They feel like they're positive, they're pro-gay, they feel good about the LGBT community, and yet they fall into these heteronormative ideas. So, for example, if I ask you to think of the word family or the word couple, most people, when I ask that question, will come back with a family is a mother, father, and 2.5 kids. That a couple is, they automatically think heterosexual, a man and a woman. Unless you add the qualifiers gay or lesbian, they don't think about those terms as being a part of those communities. And that's a heteronormative way of viewing things. And there's a lot of ways in which that plays out in our work. And so it's something that you really have to keep an eye on. Homophobia has been heard a lot. It's the fear-based reaction to anyone who engages in same-sex sexual behavior. Biphobia is fear based on response to anyone who engages in sexual behavior with both males and females. Internalized homophobia is often unconscious and enveloping, in the sense that it's people who are part of the queer community, and I use queer to sort of cover all of everybody. People who are part of the LGBT community have a tendency to internalize all of these negative ideas, and then they express them outward. Sometimes they go to the extreme of bashing other people just to prove that they're not that. So internalized homophobia is one of the things you end up dealing with a lot with clients. So sexuality. Omnisexual or pansexual is a person who is sexually attracted to all or many gender expressions. Those are terms that the community has come up with to explain their situation when they fall outside the boxes, outside of the binary constructions of sexuality. Passing is a term used mostly in the transgender community, but it's also used in the gay and lesbian community when they're able to pass and not be seen as gay or lesbian or as transgender. Sexual orientation change efforts, I already described. It's practices by professionals and lay people to change a person's sexual orientation. A lot of this is happening in churches as well as in mental health. Two-spirited is a word that's often used, and it's picked up by a lot of people, but it particularly refers to Native persons, Native American persons. And it's sort of an umbrella term as well, because it has to do with people who fall outside the gender norm and social roles for gender in their tribe, and it can involve not only dressing differently but also sexual orientation. So it's not split up. And actually, Two-Spirit is one of those ideas that there's a third gender, and there are a lot of tribes that have that belief.